Hi, I'm Kat Sapene, and I'm the painter of the Mr. Sin premium format figure.
And I'm Will Harbottle, the creator and sculptor of the new Pulp Vixens line.
And today we're going to be talking about the making of the Mr. Sin premium format figure.
I've been a lifelong fan of spy literature and pop culture going back before I can remember. An opportunity came along to do figures that are Sideshow-owned intellectual properties. So I threw out the idea of, let's create a line of female spies, which then threw us into this journey of figuring out what they would look like as we're looking at the paint here. As a sculptor, I tend not to think about color at all.
It's on grayscale because that's how you sculpt it.
I had to think about color eventually.
You had some ideas. I mean,
Yeah.
You knew you wanted it candlelit from sort of a low angle, and you had some ambient ideas of where you wanted the color to go.
The lighting really became a whole other character that I didn't really expect when we started this off.
We do forced lighting on most of the statues that we do, but this really took it to a different level. It was a very specific off-screen light with a very specific color, and to really get that feeling of candlelight, your shadows have to be more extreme, and you have to have that very warm color in your highlights to make it feel like it's a candlelit
thing. I
appreciate
how difficult that would be until we were going through this process.
Yeah, that's okay. Neither did I.
I mean, everything was different color. In orange candlelight, what the heck color is that?
Yeah.
And so that took a lot of exploration.
The underpants were easy enough to paint. It's just a little dry brush over the surface because you gave a nice bit of depth to the lingerie. Black was the color that had been suggested, and I thought that changing it to black was going to change the tone of the piece.
Red would be a completely different personality.
Exactly. Red's sexy. And
she's rolling around in red underpants. That's a different kind of personality.
Yeah. What I'm doing at this point is I'm painting the back of the robe, but there's this very detailed image on the back, and to paint it by hand is a little too thick. I start to lose all those highlights and shadows that I did in the underpainting, and so I just was airbrushing the colors in. It was also going to allow me to paint the highlights and shadows with a softer touch since it's supposed to be embroidery.
That's a kind of a neat trick. The
silly putty?
Yeah, I knew you used it, but I've never seen it before. It's funny in all these years.
And everyone's always like, "Oh, that looks so gross."
Yeah,
no, it's pretty handy. It's nice because you can use it on more delicate surfaces. It doesn't really damage the paint underneath.
One of the things that we wanted to include in this was story. And the kimono is one of them. Some of the backstory is that it's a exotic Far Eastern location, so I wanted to incorporate some of that iconography, traditional Chinese and Tibetan and other cultures' depictions of death and rebirth and transcending death is sort of one of the things that the evil genius is attempting to do. A lot of the style of the imagery was definitely inspired by a lot of the tapestries and textiles that I was researching, but the specific image itself is original. Another part of it was, going back to the sculptural side of it, we wanted to convey this vast space that this was taking place in. So the illusion of perspective that we were able to create, and really so much of it, I knew this even sculpting, it's the lighting on the back stairs that really helps to sell the depth, because I painted it in black and white and gray. I could see right away, if you light the top of the stairs and then you have the front part of the stairs dark, it immediately sends it back in space. Your mind fills in.
What I found was you have to really push that. It can't just be like, this is a little bit lighter, because the difficulty with those stairs was the lower stairs were being lit by a candle, so the front face of the stair was brighter than the top, whereas on the top you had the cave light that was shining a light on the top of the stairs. Well, what happens in the middle?
In between,
where do they just all get dark? But I mean, it wasn't just like the value of the paints, it was also the colors. So like in some of those top steps, you'll see the top ones are yellow, but then the front face of it is more purple. Since those are contrasting colors, you're going to read the extremes of light and dark more because you have the yellow step
They're
and the purple
opposites
front.
in value,
Yeah.
meaning black to white, but also opposites on the color wheel.
Yeah, exactly.
Complement.
Yeah,
Interesting.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
to help sell the illusion, it's not just value and it's not just color. It's a mix of the two, and how do you work all those things to come together?
I'm a reference junkie. I like basically everything that I sculpt. I like to have reference for it, a real world base to touch. So as you point out, I may not have had ideas for the colors, but I had all this reference that was real world.
Yeah.
So is that something that you get probably not in a comic book figures quite so much, right?
No, but I still like to go and look for those things because that is part of what we're doing anyways, bringing a bit of realism. And sometimes it's not that you want the absolute realism of the color. Like on the cave, these stalactites in the back. You didn't have a ton of reference for that, at least not in the colors that I was looking for. You've got these stalactites, but I don't want to paint them just totally smooth. What can I do? And so looking at the reference lets me see what normally happens and what sort of textures you can find. It's always really interesting.
The idea of having the top be a lithophane was fairly early on, but we really had no idea going in how we were going to execute it.
Right, yeah. You have the stalactites along the sides of the staircase leading up, and those are all dark because it's a dark cave that he's in. And so to get those to mesh with the lithophane...
It took some experimentation, I know.
Yeah, it did. The point is that when you put it up to the light is where you really get a lot of the depth
effect,
information.
yeah.
For that to work, you can't have paint in the crevices. It's really just on the surfaces. Basically, to be able to achieve that, I just used a decal with a little bit of color added to it that would just sort of encompass that outer edge that I needed. It darkens the edges effectively without darkening things that I didn't want darkened.
The biggest difficulty was the design stage, and that was figuring out how to get as much as we could into a really small space. The big breakthrough for me happened when I was working with Richard Long, one of our designers. He took a drawing of the base, because I think I had a rough 3D sculpt at that point, and so he did like a paint over of it. It was his idea to break the floor and have some of the laboratory feel broken through the floor. So we could keep it small, and then some of the stuff like the big pipe is under the ground and stuff like that, because I had all this stuff above ground. And next thing you know, you couldn't even see her because she's just, behind Frankenstein's laboratory of junk, which I wanted to suggest all that, but I couldn't figure out how to get it in there in a practical way. When he helped me see that, then the design part was over. And I feel like I'm really pleased with how successful that is. I mean, it's killer.
So this was one place where there was a bit of back and forth too, because the whole piece is so dark and that green is so bright.
Intense.
That's supposed to be this potion and these water buffalo head that's inside the tank, but we wanted it to feel like it's in a vat of this
Potion,
concoction that he's sort of come up with. But how do you do that without actually
You want to still be able to see it.
tinting the whole
Yeah,
thing? You want
right.
to be able to see it, and there's this like glass door. And so my thought was, because the door of the tank is clear, if I can paint that with a transparent green, then it will give that illusion of it being filled with this potion. It was actually kind of relaxing to just be able to paint it straightforward and not have to worry about the shadow light and the candle light and all this stuff. It was just like,
Man, that is
wee, I'm
so-
just going to paint something really gnarly.
It's super gnarly. Yeah.
To paint her hair, I needed to mask off the face, and I was using a little bit of a liquid latex there to kind of get to some of the details. The trick here was her hair is supposed to be this sort of platinum blonde. It was kind of like the underclothes where, I needed to go back and add some white with a little bit of yellow highlights in there. So her hair didn't look muddy and orange.
There's a case where if you saw a photograph, the way your mind translates, if you saw a photograph of
You read
platinum
it.
blonde hair and candlelight,
Yeah.
it's orange.
Yeah,
but
right,
somehow
right,
your
right.
mind never says, why does Marilyn Monroe have orange hair in this picture?
Yeah, it's a little bit of the difficulty with this too, because you're never going to see it in like a full context. It's still a sculpture sitting in front of you in your living room with just regular lighting. So there's always going to be a little bit of that mental translation of what you're seeing.
Periodically, I would pop by and see the progress, and when you had it together, you got
to have it together to see it. Yeah,
to get it. Yeah, you really do.
Yeah, I mean, because like here you can see with just the head, you can really see the light side and the shadow side and what a weird color that shadow side is. Because it is. It's not a normal skin tone. And even the light side, you know, even just in comparison to my skin tone there, it's very yellow and orange. But you have to sort of let go of it a little bit and remember that it's part of a scene.
Yeah.
Her eye direction was another one that needed to be pretty specific because she's supposed to look startled. You know, she kind of looks off to the side because she's like not sure exactly where it came from, but like, I think I've been caught, you know, sort of. So it needed to have a little bit of white almost all the way around.
Almost crazy eye.
Yeah, almost crazy eye around the whole thing so that you got more of that feeling of surprise.
Well, and actually that reminds me of one of the inspirations for all these pieces was sort of the classical pinup. Yeah. And each one of these, in our own way, is commenting on the classical pinup. And in this one, it's the trope of the startled beauty. Right. So this is that, but sort of deconstructed and put back together another way. So yeah, we didn't want her to look frightened or...
No, you know, it's just more startled and like, oh, I got caught. And how am I going to handle it? You know, you can see the wheels turning in her head of like, okay, how am I going to handle this? What's the situation? And this was just kind of going back in and adding a little bit more depth to the hair, some washes, but then also a little pass of a dry brush of sort of I think it's just a pearl with, I think I put a touch
sparkle.
Of gold in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That helps sell the light hitting it because you just want it where the light is hitting it. It doesn't need to be on the shadow side. There's no light hitting that, so there's not going to be any
sparkle, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Thanks for watching and listening to our conversation about the making of the Mr. Sin premium format figure.